Hi everyone, welcome back for another week on my YouTube channel. My name is Brandy. I am the owner and artisan behind Brush by Brandy, and each week I give you guys a full tutorial, and this week we are working on this piece behind me, and it is wow, you guys. This one is a jaw dropper. It's gorgeous. It's the epitome of luxury and elegance. I love this finish. So this week we are going to be adding some wood you bend moldings. We're going to be working in metallics, lots of metallics. You can tell it's got some sparkle, right? Getting a smooth finish. It's just all about luxury. So this piece was gorgeous on its own. It's got this beautiful bow front, and I'm just going to use some of these moldings to accentuate it. So we're going to take a basic white finish. White doesn't have to be boring. And this week we're going to spice it up and make it elegant. So stick around. Let's go ahead and get started. Here's where I started on this piece. It's a beautiful set that I picked up, and look at that veneer. It's actually really cool. I would have loved to put a wood look on these, but thankfully I got an order on them, so I didn't have to decide. I want to go ahead and do a white finish on them. That's what my customer requested, so I know I need to put a coat of Dixie Belle Boss on. This is a stain and odor blocking primer that's going to keep my white nice and crisp and clean. Boss comes in gray and clear and in white, and I chose white because it's going to be a great base for my white paint. Even though these pieces are made from a light colored wood, a blonde wood, it doesn't mean that they can't bleed through my paint. So this layer of Boss is going to create a barrier that keeps any tannins from my wood from seeping through and discoloring my paint over time. I'm applying the white Boss using a flocked roller. This is just a hardware store item. After 2 coats, I'm ready to start my paint finish. I felt like this piece was a little plain in the centers and I wanted to add a detail, so I looked at 2 wood you bend moldings and held them up to my piece and took a photo to try to decide which one I wanted to use. All right, I love this piece, but it's a little plain in the centers here. And so I decided I'm going to add a little bit of wood you bend molding. So let me show you guys a few of my favorite tools when I'm adding wood you bend moldings. So obviously a heat gun, and a heat gun works great with wood you bend, except these are fairly large pieces and there's several of them that I'm going to add, so it would take me a while with my heat gun. So I'm going to bypass this. I also use a crock pot, and I just picked this up at my local thrift store. It was brand new, but I just use this for cooking wood you bend, but it's pretty small too, so it only works for smaller pieces. So this is my kitchen griddle, and I'm going to heat up my wood you bend on the kitchen griddle. And that is because it's going to heat this all the way through. So some of these fairly thick pieces can take a little bit of time with a heat gun, but I've had these on here for less than 5 minutes and they're already starting to soften. So I'm going to do this on my griddle, and it's going to heat these all up really quickly, and then they'll stay nice and soft until I'm ready to attach them. All right, the next thing I need to do, these are a little large for my area, and so I just need to cut off the tips of these. I'm going to cut it right along this line right here. I'm just going to use a razor knife, and I want to put it on this sort of hard surface. And then I save these little cuts because they're good. I can still reuse this for something else. And so I shortened it. You can see this edge right here versus this here. You want to make sure your wood you bend's a little bit soft before you cut it so that it doesn't crack. But I've just had it on my griddle for a few minutes. I can cut that. They come right off, and I've got a nice end, and these are the perfect length for exactly where I want to apply them. I'm going to let that keep heating up. After about 5 minutes on my griddle, my wood you bend is nice and bendy and it's ready to apply. So I'm going to go ahead and apply a thin coat of Titebond Quick and Thick adhesive to the back side of my wood you bend molding. Then I'm just going to use my finger to spread out the glue, make sure I don't have any thick spots, and I get nice even coverage for good contact on my molding. With the molding applied, I'm just going to use a razor knife and go ahead and slice my molding right along the line where my drawers meet up. Then I'm just going to use an old paintbrush and clean up any glue that has seeped out around the edges of my molding and press it down, making sure it's perfectly seated. Even though this adhesive dries clear, I don't want to have any globs that are around the edges of this molding. I want this piece to be incredibly ornate, so I chose to add one of these appliques to each of the 4 corners of this molded frame that goes around the front of the piece. I did choose to apply my appliques after my 2 coats of Boss. You can go ahead and apply them on the raw piece and put your Boss over top, but I don't like to get my paint too thick over the molding. It can start to gather in the crevices and make thick spots around it, so I chose to do these after the Boss but before my paint finish. I had two moldings that I looked at for the front of this piece, and I did choose the longer design, the more horizontal one, because I felt like it was a nice complement to the shape of the piece. I've got these moldings nice and soft from sitting on my griddle. I'm going to apply that thin coat of Type On Quick and Thick, make sure it's seated nicely to the front of my piece. I'm just going to use a wet wipe to wipe away any glue globs that may have gotten around the edges, a paintbrush to get into any crevices that I can't get to with my wipe, just to make sure it's nice and clean. None of that glue is seeping out from underneath, and this piece is nice and attached. With my moldings all attached, this piece is ready to go ahead and start my paint finish. The color that I'm using for the main body color on this is Dixie Belle Fluff. This is probably my favorite white in the line to use because it gets great coverage for a white. So I chose Fluff. It's also a little bit slightly off-white. It has a little bit of a gray undertone, which will be perfect with the French linen that I'm using to complement it. I start off by giving myself a base layer of the fluff that I can work with, and then I'm going to make sure I hit all of my moldings in Dixie Belle French linen. Now, French linen is actually going to be the base for a metallic, but when you're using metallics, you want to make sure that you use a base color that's similar in color for coverage. Metallics have less pigments in them, so they don't cover as well. The French linen is going to make sure I have good coverage underneath. I made sure to dig that into all the crevices of the appliques that I attached, and then I'm going to blend it into the fluff around the edges. I'm going to repeat this same process on all of my appliques. I'm hitting them with a little bit of my French linen and then blending it into the base of fluff. Here's where I landed on this piece with my appliques installed and my base coat of paint. I did come back and end up adding more appliques to the opposing corners. At first I thought I would just use 4, but I did end up using 8 on the front. Okay, what I'm working on is I've added all my wood you bend moldings, and now I want to add this subtle shading around the outside. And this looks like a wax, but it's all done with paint. So I'm going to come and do these guys here. And what I started out doing so that I would have full coverage is I just came on all of my moldings and I added a base coat of Dixie Belle French linen. And that's because this is the closest color to the metallic that I'm going to be using, which is Dixie Belle Steel Magnolia. The metallic paints have less pigments in them, and so you need a color of a base of a similar color underneath for coverage. So I just went ahead and laid on a base of French linen. Once I have my base of French linen on, I'm going to let that dry, and I'm going to come down here and let's go ahead and do the final look on this guy. So the first thing I want to do, I'm going to work only from here down. I want to add a little bit of my Dixie Belle Fluff. And Fluff is the main body color, and I'm just going to add it right here where I plan to kind of blend these in. And that's just to give myself a little bit of paint to work with. And then over the top of my French linen, I'm going to add some Dixie Belle Steel Magnolia. Steel Magnolia is a metallic paint, but it's almost identical to that French linen underneath, so you really can't tell the difference. The difference is just in the sheen of the paint. And I want these to be nice and sparkly metallic with just a little bit of a sparkly halo around all of these moldings is kind of what I'm going for. So I'm going to go ahead and just go over all this French linen using my Dixie Belle Steel Magnolia. And I'm going to get this corner right here a little bit too. All right, and once I've got a little bit of that metallic on, I need to work it into the surrounding paint. So I'm going to come back with my brush for my fluff. I'm going to add a little bit of water, and I'm just going to brush those two together, just kind of overlapping. And I'm going to come all the way down around here and do the same. And then I'm going to clean up this line behind because I want this to stay nice and pure white. So I just clean that back up, get rid of anywhere I got that metallic paint. A little bit of water. All right, and now I need to work them together. And I'm going to take my Dixie Belle Oval Medium that I've kept nice and clean and dry. I just make sure I tack it off periodically with a cloth. And I'm going to swirl together where these two colors meet up. And it's going to just create this little subtle, add a little bit of water right here. Just gives me this really soft blend. There's a very subtle color difference in between that Steel Magnolia and the fluff. And then I'm just going to clean up my white a little bit. I want to keep the fluff as pure and clean and white as I can. I like over here. I'm going to get down here a little bit. So I just laid the two colors onto the body, and then just a little swirling with that oval medium pulls them together. And that's the look that I'm going for, where I've got this subtle highlight just around the edges of my molding. But from the swirling, I can pull a little bit of my fluff paint and it can start to dull the metallic. So I'm just going to come back after I do that with the brush for the metallic, and I'm just going to hit the edges of this molding one more time just to make sure the very top coat that I have on there is all the metallic. I don't want to lose that sheen. And blending it with the flat paint, I can start to lose the sheen. So I just go over it one last time. And that gives me this pure rich metallic on the top. And it just blends subtly into the fluff paint. All right, let's come do the side portion, and then I'll come back and get this little molding right here that I just put a coat on. So the sides on this piece are really, really simple. This is mostly fluff. So what I'm going to start out doing is I'm going to use a lot of water just so my brush glides easily over the top, and I want to give myself just a thin layer of the fluff. This is just going to freshen up my paint. I'm going to brush it horizontally just for coverage, and then I'll come back and clean those up to vertical brush strokes. Got a little fuzz in there, so I'm going to pick that up with my brush. And then I will come back and do this other half here. Same, a lot of water. Once I have the coverage I need, my second coat is usually a lot of water. And this has already 2 coats of Dixie Belle Boston White on it. And then my coat of Dixie Belle Fluff. So I've got great coverage on here, but I need to add this little highlight around the top and the bottom that I did. So next, this is French linen. I'm going to dip into my brush into the Steel Magnolia, and I'm going to make myself a stripe. Just a stripe, just like that. And once I've got a nice stripe, I'm going to come back with my brush for my fluff, and I'm going to brush right over the top of where those two meet up. On the sides, I'm just doing a little highlight down at the bottom and one up at the top. I've got a little bit of paint right here, so I'll clean that up in just a minute. I'm going to come up to the top here, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing, just a stripe of my metallic, my Steel Magnolia. And then I'm going to come over top with my fluff, a little bit of water, and I'm just going to brush those two together. All right, that's nice and clean. And now I want to get in this crevice right here because I did get a little bit of paint, so just a little bit of water. And I'm going to clean up that crevice and keep that nice and white. All right, I'm also going to clean up this strip right here. I just give it another fresh coat of the fluff, and that gets it back to the nice pure white color that I want. And then I'm just going to fix right here where I got a little bit of my fluff, and I'm going to go over it with my oval medium one more time. and then strengthen up that metallic. All right, let's give it one more shot. Let's go ahead and do this guy up here that I put the French linen base on. So I've got my French linen, and now I want to come over top with the metallic. I'm going to dig this all in and get this nice and shiny. And these moldings are going to kind of glow. They're going to glow with the halo that I'm creating around it, and also with the metallic effect, how it's going to catch the light. All right, I want to make sure I don't have any paint globbed in the crevices of my molding, so I just clean that up. A nice smooth coat over the top, and then I've got this little area around the edge, and this is where I'm going to blend it into that white paint. And I can come back and clean this up because it's just pure white, so that's a really easy cleanup. A little bit of water, bring some fluff in, and then I'm going to come back with my oval medium. Let me get that nice and clean. I try to keep it from getting too muddy. If it does get too muddy, I'll just introduce another oval medium. I'm going to brush those together. A little bit of water. And then I just want to clean it up where it comes into the white. Clean up this outer side once again. That's an easy cleanup. And then I'm going to clean up right over the top. All right, I think I'm going to do this little section one last time. Super easy. All right, I like that look. So I've got this nice soft halo effect that goes around just all of my moldings. I'm going to come back and accentuate this with a little bit of waxes or glaze and some gilding wax, and we'll be closer to our final look. All right, my next step on these moldings, now that I've got my metallic all blended in, is I'm going to add a little bit of glaze. And glaze is a liquid formula, and I'm going to use it to accentuate some of the low points on this mold to create a kind of shadowing effect. So I'm going to be using Dixie Belle glaze, and this is black glaze that I've tinted with a little bit of Dixie Belle coffee bean paint. So I'm going to take an artist brush, and I'm just going to brush it in, and I dig it into all the crevices on this molding. This is my Would You Bend molding, and I'm going to come in here and get this. I'm not going to get this edge right here, and that's because I'm going to use waxes for that portion. So I'm going to do a combination of waxes and glaze on this piece. And this is my recipe for accentuating any kind of moldings. I like my low points to be dark, and I like my lights or my high points to be highlighted with a gilding wax. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. By the time that I'm done, I will have the glaze in the low points, which is this dark. I will have my paint finish, which is a medium, and then I will put some gilding wax on the top, which is going to be a contrasting metallic, and it's going to bring out some depth and dimension in this molding. Okay, so once I've got this brushed over everywhere, I'm going to make sure I've got it dug into all the crevices, because those are the parts I want to get pay attention to. And then, like I said, I'm not going to do this edge over here because I actually want to hit that with some waxes. And then I'm going to take a dry rag, and I'm just going to go over and I'm going to wipe back as much as I can on this molding using just the dry rag. I use my finger and dig it into any areas that I can. I'm going to take off as much of this glaze as I can. All right, and then I'm going to let my glaze dry, and let's go over and we're going to work on another molding with what our next step in this is going to be. Okay, so this molding right here already has my glaze on it and it's already nice and dry. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come back with a little bit of Dixie Belle Best Dang wax, and this color is Grand Gray, and this is an old tin because I love old tins of wax. They harden a little bit and it actually makes the waxes really nice to work with. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to frame out the front end of this. Now I didn't put glaze along the front of this because I want to actually accentuate this highlight that I created with my paint. So I just followed that with an artist brush, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to smudge this out a little bit. All right, and that just deepens that crevice. And then the other ones that I want to accentuate is I'm going to take my same Grand Gray wax and I'm just going to run it along these moldings here, just to get a nice gray low light right along those edges. Nice and dark right in the edges. Okay, and I have one more step for these moldings. I told you I was going to add a little bit of gilding wax. This is Dixie Belle gilding wax, and this color is gold. And all I'm going to do is take with my finger, and I'm just going to start hitting some of the high points on this molding. And I love the contrast that the gold has against the steel magnolia paint. I'm not going to fully cover this. I'm just going to get some of these ridges. But I love how this looks. I've got that glaze down low, I've got the gilding wax up high, and then my paint finish in the middle, which is that steel magnolia metallic, and those are really rich and deep, versus here where I just have my paint finish. It's still a really pretty look, but you can see how those colors add extra depth and dimension. So I'm going to go ahead and finish all the moldings on this piece, the glaze, then a little bit of wax detailing, and then my gilding wax, and that'll be how I finish all these moldings. The moldings on this piece were a lot of work, but they're gorgeous, you guys. Okay, so now that this is done, I'm ready to go ahead and lay a clear coat onto this. I'm going to spray this one in 2 coats of Dixie Belle Gator Hide. I'm just using a pneumatic spray system. This is a Husky gun attached to a DeWalt compressor, and it lays on the coats of Gator Hide really nice. I do not dilute Gator Hide when I spray. It sprays really well. All right, here is the finished piece. Let's walk this one over. It's incredible, you guys. The paint, the detail, the moldings, just beautiful. Okay, let's talk a little bit about my staging on this one. So it's a really basic color scheme. I've got my white with my gold details, and so I chose to pull that out in all my staging. I've got my one pop of gray up here, and that kind of ties in with the steel magnolia that I used on the piece. And then I did little tiny details in a rose gold gilding wax just down here. And other than that, there's really no color on this whole piece. So these are some gold frames. I've got a whole collection of them. I've slowly picked them up off Facebook Marketplace as I see them for really inexpensive or free. I've probably only got like $15 in frames here. These I picked up at Ross, I think, for, I don't know, maybe $10. And then of course, I've got a huge collection of silk flowers that I've accumulated over time, and a gold vase. And other than that, it's really simple. It's really clean. And here are some final photos for you guys. This one is completely done. What do you guys think of this finish? Leave me some comments and let me know how you think these improvements went. Do you guys like the moldings? What was your favorite part of this video? This one covered a lot. We added would you bend moldings. We blended flat paint into metallic paint, which is absolutely possible. We really accentuated these moldings, used a little bit of highlighting details. It's absolutely elegant. I hope you guys enjoyed this week's video. If you did, please click that subscribe button. I always appreciate when you guys subscribe and stick around for next week's video as well. As always, you can find links for everything I use in the description for this post, and you can find more Brush by Brandy on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, YouTube, and on my website at brushbybrandy.com.